Hey there, tonight you're not some distant observer of history. You're in it, right in the thick of mud-caked streets, candlelit taverns and whispered deals made in alley shadows. Forget gold crowns and royal robes. This is about how real people, peasants and paupers, pulled themselves out of the dirt and into wealth using grit, wit and sometimes more than a little trickery. Because while medieval life was brutal and short, it wasn't without its hustlers. People who saw cracks in the system and slipped through. People who turned manure into money, shadows into silver, and sometimes broke every law in the kingdom to get ahead. And here's the twist. You're one of them. If this kind of time-traveling hustle brings you peace or just a strange kind of comfort, feel free to like the video and subscribe. Not because you have to, but because maybe, just maybe, you're the kind of person who would have made it back then. Barely. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it? It's always oddly reassuring to know who else is winding down to the same strange journey. So, get comfortable. Maybe lay back, breathe slow, and imagine this. You've got nothing but your hands, your hunger, and your instincts. But if you play it right, you might just become the richest person in town, one hustle at a time. Let's begin. Boiling bones for silver, the gelatin seller's grim secret. You start with a stench, a deep, clinging, greasy stink that works into your skin and never fully leaves. Your hands are raw, your apron is stiff with old blood, and your neighbours look the other way when they pass you, because they know exactly what you do for a living. You boil bones. Not just any bones. Horse bones, pig bones, cow skulls. Sometimes even the parts of the dead that no one wanted to talk about. The parts that didn't make it to market. Leftovers from butchers. Or worse, graveyard sweepings from plagues long past. It begins before dawn. You gather your fuel, scraps of peat, bundles of twigs, anything dry enough to burn. You stack the bones high in the cauldron, then you add water and salt and wait for hours. The fire spits, the bones hiss. The smell crawls through the village like a warning. But what you're making isn't filth, it's profit. Because once you strain the liquid, let it cool, and slice it into slabs, you've got gelatin, a miracle product, thickener for stews, a binding agent for pills and potions, even a cosmetic secret sold to noble women to restore youth to tired skin. No one likes you, but they all need you. Apothecaries pay in coin. Bakers barter flour for your jiggling blocks. And the wealthy, who would rather die than touch your boiling pot, send messengers to buy your wares under another name. Some nights you lie awake listening to the wind push against your hut, and you wonder, how many fortunes in this town started with something rotting? You don't wear fine clothes, you don't own land, but you eat meat when others can't. You've got a stash of silver rings buried under your floorboards, and people don't ask too many questions when you walk through the square, because they know, where there's death, there's decay, and where there's decay, you've found a way to get rich. It's not holy, it's not clean, but it works, and in the medieval world, that's enough. Mud, sweat, and miracle mud. How you'd sell peasant, cures and get away with it. You start with mud, not just any mud, the dark, clay-thick stuff that bubbles near the riverbank after a heavy rain. The kind that sucks at your boots and smells faintly of sulphur and rot. It doesn't look like much, just muck, sludge, a nuisance, but in your hands it becomes a miracle. You scoop it into wooden buckets, pack it into linen cloth, and carry it into the village with the air of someone who knows secrets. You've been watching. Old Marta limps with a bad hip. The baker's boy has a rash creeping up his arms. The blacksmith's daughter hasn't spoken a word in 3 days. They've tried herbs, prayers, even leeches. But you've got the healing earth, You learn to say it with confidence, whisper it just loud enough in the tavern, let it roll off your tongue like it came from a monastery across the sea. This mud, you claim, is sacred, dug from a blessed pit, cured by the moon, infused with the energy of saints. Is any of that true? Of course not. But when you rub it gently into a swollen joint, or smear it across a poxed forehead, something does happen. Time passes. The pain dulls. The person relaxes, if only because they believe they're healing. And sometimes belief is all it takes. You sell it by the handful. You wrap it in waxed cloth and call it holy paste. You charge double for batches collected during full moons. And you swear, on nothing in particular, that it works better for children because the earth speaks clearer to younger blood. No one asks for proof. They just want hope, and you give it to them, one pouch at a time. You don't claim to be a healer, not outright. That could get you into trouble, but you don't stop others from calling you one either. Some nights you rinse your hands in the same muddy river. Watch the water carry away the last traces of your deception. But is it really a lie, you wonder, if people feel better after? You sleep light, you dream of saints, of coins clinking together in a worn leather pouch. And when morning comes, you walk the streets again, peddling miracles made from river sludge. Because in this world, belief is currency. And you're the one minting it. Rusty coins, real fortune, the smuggler's game in the monastery vault. You were never meant to be there. The monastery's back halls aren't for your kind, muddy boots, frayed sleeves, eyes too sharp for someone who claims to pray. But you've got a talent. You know how to move through places like a shadow. And more importantly, you know what's behind that old wooden door under the chapel stairs. Not relics, not bones of saints. Coin. Stacks of it. Offerings from pilgrims, taxes from tenants, gold sent from nobles trying to buy penance, and none of it gets counted as closely as it should. That's where you come in. You don't break in, you volunteer. You sweep floors, carry firewood, replace candles. You spend weeks becoming invisible. Then, on a quiet evening, while the monks are deep in chant, you slip into the vault with a candle stub and your pockets stitched with secret folds. You don't take much. A few groats here, a clipped denier there. Just enough to notice, but not enough to spark panic. Back in your hut you file down the faces. You dirty them with ash and oil. Then you sell them outside the village, at markets where no one asks questions, where a worn coin is just a coin. Sometimes you trade for goods. Sometimes you lend them out. For interest, of course. And slowly, quietly, you start becoming someone who matters. But here's the part that makes your heart race. The monks know something's wrong. They speak in hushed tones now. They double-check the collection baskets. One of them gave you a long stare at morning prayer. Still, they haven't acted. Because what if it's not you? What if it's Brother Thomas with his twitching hands? Or that novice who always seems to vanish around dusk? You've seeded just enough doubt. You don't need to be a knight to conquer something. You just need to be smarter than the system, and quieter than the suspicion. You dream of a cottage on the hill. You dream of silk. You dream of never smelling beeswax and incense again. One coin at a time, that dream gets closer, and all it cost you was a little faith. Blood and blisters, renting out your teeth to the nobility. You didn't plan on becoming a walking set of teeth for hire, but when a noble woman offers you a silver coin just to smile with your mouth closed, well, you learn to keep your grin polished and your doubts quiet. It starts with gossip. The Lady of Thornhall is to be married. She's beautiful, rich, and hiding a secret behind silk fans and veils. She has no teeth, not one. Illness, they say, or too much honeyed wine. But appearances are everything, and the marriage is political. So her steward finds you, young, unspoiled, a full mouth of strong peasant teeth. He offers a coin to stand beside her at the feast. smile when she does, and eat, very publicly, the food she cannot. It's awkward at first. You chew venison at her signal. You fake a laugh when she tells stories. You wipe your mouth when she touches hers. Most don't notice. The ones who do say nothing, because to question a noble's grace is to question your own safety. But the real money doesn't come from the feasts, it comes later. Whispers begin. Other nobles hear of the tooth boy. Then it's the smile servant. Soon, you're being passed between courts like a prized accessory. They dress you in velvet, give you a fake name. They tell you to nod, to bow, to never speak unless spoken to. You're paid to smile, paid to eat, paid to make other people seem whole, and each job pays more. You learn tricks. How to shade your gums with soot to look older or younger. How to clench your jaw just enough to hide gaps in someone else's mouth. You once wore false moles drawn in ink to match a lady's chin, but it wears on you. Not the smiling, not the chewing, the pretending. Because at the end of each performance, you're back in your cot, wiping goose fat from your borrowed tunic, wondering who you really are. Still, the money's good, and your teeth, miraculously, are still in your head. For now, because someone once mentioned another job, a different kind of replacement, one involving pliers and a bit of herbal numbing. You didn't say yes, but you didn't say no either. And in this world, hesitation is just another currency. The perfuming grift, boiling rats to sell, plague protection to the elite. Your neighbours think you're some kind of healer. The nobles think you're a chemist, but you know what you really are. A rat collector with a strong stomach and a sharp sense of smell. You make perfume, not the kind that wafts like roses in a spring garden. Yours is different, powerful, sharp, pungent in just the right way, because in times of plague, anything that masks the smell of death is gold. You start by boiling rats. Yes, actual gutter-crawling, plague-likely rats. Not for the meat, not even for the bones. For the oils trapped in their skin and glands. Rank, concentrated, potent. You mix it with vinegar, crushed herbs, rotted citrus, and a handful of spices you can barely afford. Then you strain it through linen, bottle it in reused glass vials, and brand it with your signature. A wax seal bearing a crude drawing of Saint Sebastian, patron of plague victims. You call it elixir of warding. It smells like cloves, bile, and something no one can quite name. And it sells like fire in a drought. You whisper to noble women that it was discovered in a Venetian monastery. You tell monks it was used by Egyptian priests. You claim it keeps death away. And the more desperate the town, the higher the price. You sell it outside of graveyards, at the gates of leper houses, even to the guards at the palace, who splash it on their tunics like armor. They believe because they need to, because it's better than believing nothing works. One bottle feeds you for a week, 2 buys you favors with the apothecary, a dozen, and you're suddenly someone worth protecting. And yes, sometimes your hands sting, sometimes your chest tightens from the fumes. Once or twice you thought your vision blurred after too long with the lid off, but you're alive. And more than that, you're thriving, because while others panic, you profit. And in a world where survival is a prayer, you're the one selling hope, one fetid drop at a time. Bread, beer and bribery, cornering the market on yeast. You'd think yeast would be free. It's invisible. It floats in the air. It lives in bread and beer, and it dies when it's not treated right. But that's exactly why it's valuable, because no one really understands it, except you. It started when your mother's bread stopped rising. 3 days of flat loaves and curses thrown at the sky. You went out in the morning, scraping the inside of an old brew barrel behind the tavern, took the foamy scum, wrapped it in damp cloth and left it by the hearth. The next morning your dough was bubbling like a witch's cauldron. That's when you realized you could farm yeast, feed it, dry it, shape it, and more importantly, you could sell it. You started small, a spoonful to the baker's wife, a lump to the brewer, a handful to a travelling cook. At first, they paid in kind, bread, ale, the occasional chicken bone stew. But then came the markets, then the orders. Now you're packaging dried yeast like treasure, wrapped in linen, sealed with wax, kept in tiny wooden boxes you carve with your initials. You've even named the strains: Springwake, Hearthgold, Monk's Bloom. The nobility doesn't bake, but they pay top coin for the brewers who do. And the brewers, they fight over your product like dogs over bones. You control the rise of bread. You control the foam of ale. You've made yeast a gate-kept commodity. But there's a twist. The local guild caught wind of your operation, the Bakers' Guild. They say it's unregulated, that your products are impure, dangerous, heretical. They've sent warnings. Men in hoods with dull knives and duller smiles. They want a cut, a piece of the rise. So you pay them, not always in coin, but in favours, secrets, spoiled batches that suddenly become theirs. It's a dangerous dance, but you've got flour on your hands and gold in your pouch. You've turned fermentation into fortune, and as long as there are mouths to feed and tankards to fill, you'll never go hungry. The flesh market, how selling exotic meats, made you a local legend. You tell people it's venison, and maybe the first time it was, but the second, the third, by then you'd learned a hard truth. No one really knows what venison looks like if it's been skinned properly, soaked in the right brine and covered in enough onion and spice. You started small, a feral dog, caught it near the woods, where the bark was scarred and the trees whispered warnings. You bled it, cleaned it, roasted the haunch, and offered it on a borrowed platter to a merchant from the city. He said it was the best stag he'd ever tasted, and he paid well. After that, it became a routine. Fox, owl, hedgehog. If it had legs and blood, you found a way to make it taste noble. But the real profit came when you started naming them. Highland boar, forest fowl, grey elk of the borderlands. Nonsense, all of it. But it sold. At feasts, your meat was the centerpiece, drenched in honey, laid on beds of apples, perfumed with rosemary. You built a reputation, the hunter of forgotten beasts. Of course, not everyone was fooled. The local butcher gave you looks. The tanner once found bones behind your hut that didn't match your claims. And the priest, he warned you. Gently at first, then louder. You'll be judged for feeding lies to the flock, he said. But the flock didn't care. They wanted flavour, fantasy, a break from barley and saltfish. You gave it to them. You made enough to buy a real spit, real pans, a sharp new cleaver. You even hired a boy to skin and prep. He didn't ask questions, just sharpened blades and kept quiet. One day, a knight came to your stall. He bit into a skewer, wiped his mouth, and asked if you could deliver a whole roasted boar to the castle in 2 days' time. You said yes. That night, you looked into the forest and felt something look back. But your hands didn't shake. Not anymore. You're not a hunter. You're a merchant of myth. And in a world starved for legends, the truth is just another ingredient you can leave out. Dirt to gold, the magical mud you sold to heal the sick. It began in the swamp, where no one dared go except children on dares and the dying with nowhere else to crawl. You were neither, but you were desperate, and desperate people noticed things, like how the mud near the centre bubbled differently, how it steamed in the cold, how animals who drank from the edge sometimes healed faster, sometimes didn't die at all. So you brought back a handful in a cracked wooden bowl, smeared it on your brother's rash, watched it fade overnight. Coincidence, maybe. But in a world of saints and relics, who questions a miracle? You started selling it at market, calling it Blessed Mire. Said it came from a sacred pool deep in the woods, guarded by birds that never blinked. Said it cured everything but sin. You wrapped it in cloth, tied it with twine, whispered prayers over it. People lined up, blisters healed, sores dried. A woman who hadn't walked in months claimed she felt her toes tingle again. You watched your silver pouch swell, but not all believed. A monk from the north tested your mud on a dog. The dog died. He accused you of false cures, called it filth. Said healing came only from the divine, not from swamp sludge sold by a barefoot peasant with a silver tongue. You were nearly banned from the market, so you adapted, added rosemary to the mud, boiled it with sage, let it ferment until it smelled like medicine instead of death. You rebranded St. Milda's Earth, named after a long-forgotten martyr you made up on the spot. Demand surged again. The mud didn't always work. Sometimes it made things worse. But people wanted to believe. They needed to believe that healing could come from somewhere cheap, somewhere close. And when the winter coughs came, your poultices sold faster than bread. Now you sleep above your own stall. You own 2 donkeys. Your name is whispered alongside herbalist and blessed. You know it's mud, just mud, but in a world where magic is hope in disguise, dirt might just be the most profitable lie of all. The fake saints' relics, bones, lies, and holy prophets. You found the bone in the woods, thin, clean, probably animal, but under moonlight and desperation it looked almost sacred. You wrapped it in linen, whispered nonsense over it, then walked into the village chapel with your back straight and your face full of awe. "I've seen a vision," you said. "They came to me, a martyr from the old days. Her relic was buried in the moss beyond the black oak." The priest blinked. The townsfolk leaned in. You unfurled the cloth like it held a treasure from heaven. From that moment, you became a keeper of relics. At first, it was just stories. St. Margola's thumb, St. Oswin's knuckle, a tooth from a holy monk who never ate meat. You kept them in a box carved from driftwood, sprinkled with ash and salt. People came to see them, to touch them, to pray. You built a shrine out of broken carts and mossy stones, hung herbs from the rafters, burned sweet-smelling wood to chase away doubt. And then came the gifts. Coins dropped into your hands like blessings. Chickens left at your doorstep. A young man travelled 2 villages just to press his sick child's hand to the saint's skull, which was, in truth, a hollowed gourd with a bone glued inside. It got bigger. You carved bones to look older, filed notches, painted faint inscriptions. You claimed to find fragments of a sandal worn by a wandering monk who spoke to angels. One day, a noble arrived, a real one, armour, horse, guards. He asked to buy a relic. You didn't flinch, offered him the fingernail of Saint Ilia. He paid in silver heavy enough to bruise your palms, but then came the church. Not the local priest, he already feared you. No, this was a robed man with a gold cross and eyes like burned-out coals. He asked questions, took notes, didn't touch your relics. "You should be careful," he said, voice dry as parchment. "Miracles draw attention, sometimes the wrong kind." You nodded. That night, you buried your oldest relics deep, burned the fakes that looked too recent, rewrote your stories to match older scripture, because you're not in this for faith, you're in this for survival. And in a world where belief can bend reality, selling bones is safer than breaking them. The peasant banker, lending pennies and controlling futures. It started with a single coin, not one you earned, one you didn't spend. You could have used it to buy stew or a waxed thread for your boot. But something told you to hold it. Instead, you lent it to a neighbour. She needed to buy eggs to bake for a feast. She promised to pay you back double if the village liked her cakes. She did. They did. You got 2 coins. And just like that, you realise something. It's not about how much you have, it's about who needs it more than you do. You became a lender. First it was simple loans, pennies to farmers to buy seed, a couple of silver pieces to a herder needing a second goat. Interest? Of course. You weren't running a charity, you were building something. You kept track with sticks. Notches for every borrower, horizontal slashes when they paid. You burned the sticks when debts were cleared. That smell, scorched wood and closure, became your incense. Eventually you ran out of your own coins, so you borrowed from the baker, who borrowed from the brewer, who owed the butcher. Now you weren't just a lender, you were a node in the web of debt that held the whole village together. People came to you for dowries, funeral offerings, piglets, roofing nails. Some repaid with goods, others with labour. One man offered you his winter cloak as collateral. You took it. But it wasn't all smooth. A boy defaulted, a pig died, a merchant fled town. So you invented insurance, a tax on the loans, small, hidden, folded into the repayment. You said it was for rainy days. No one argued. Then the priest came, asked how it felt to profit off the desperate. You offered him a loan to fix the chapel roof. He took it. Now, you don't work the land. You sit on a stool in the corner of the square, cloak clean, hands soft. Your wealth isn't counted in silver, it's counted in promises. You know when babies will be born, when debts will come due, who's marrying, who's dying. You own the timing of lives. Some call you greedy, but you think of it as clarity. You turned 1 coin into a village that moves when you nod. And in a world built on toil, you found a way to profit from time itself. The silent tax, poop privies, and the dung hustle that paid off big. You knew early on that gold didn't always glint. Sometimes it squelched. The village had a smell. It clung to clothes, to hair, to dreams. It came from the backs of animals, the corners of fields, the overfilled pits behind homes. But where others wrinkled their noses, you wrinkled your brow and started thinking. Because while everyone was dumping their waste, no one was collecting it. You began with a shovel and a barrel. At night, when the village hushed and the stars blinked down in judgment, you made rounds. You scooped from the privies, the barn floors, even the alley behind the chapel. You loaded your cart with shame and stink. But it wasn't filth to you, it was fuel. Not for fire, but for growth. You'd notice something. The fields that got hit with the worst runoff, they grew the greenest. So you started selling your findings. You called it black soil, wrapped in linen pouches and sold to farmers too poor for ash or compost. It made turnips the size of fists, onions that brought tears from their sheer strength. Word spread. You didn't just sell it now, you traded it for eggs, for bread, for favours. But here's the clever part. You told the farmers the secret wasn't just what was in it, but when it was collected. New moon dung's best, you whispered. The old saints knew it. They believed you. They had to. The proof was in their cabbages. One day, a nobleman's steward heard about your miracle mix. You sold him 2 barrels. He wrinkled his nose, handed over a silver coin, and held the reins of his horse tighter than the bag in his hand. You laughed. Your cart got bigger. You paid a boy to do the scooping. You designed a route and stuck to it with monk-like discipline. Of course, people started talking, called you the dung man. Children held their noses. But their parents bought your bags in secret. Now, you don't farm. You fertilize fortunes. You move through the village invisible, like a breeze of rot and prosperity. Because in the end, even waste is wealth, if you're the one holding the shovel. River gold, the dirty business of medieval laundry espionage. You were never strong enough for the fields. Your back gave out when you were barely grown, and your hands shook too much for sewing. But you had two gifts: ears that caught whispers like nets catch fish, and a perfect memory. So you sat by the river, pretending to scrub. The washerwomen didn't see you as a threat. They laughed, gossiped, wept, and swore while beating clothes against stones, and you listened. Who owed what? Who was cheating whom? Which merchant was skimming weight from the scales? Which guard liked his wine too much? And most importantly, who had coins stashed in floorboards or buried under the pigsty? You started passing notes. At first it was innocent, a warning here, a tip there. But information once tasted is more addictive than wine. You began trading knowledge. The baker's wife paid you in loaves to find out if her sister's suitor had another family 2 towns over. He did. A travelling merchant handed you silver to learn which roads were being watched by taxmen. You found out. A jealous craftsman asked if his apprentice had stolen from him. He hadn't, but now the apprentice owed you a favour. You weren't a washer anymore. You were a broker of truths. You disguised yourself in rags, still going to the river, still pretending to wash. But your mind was sharp and your network vast. You paid children for rumours, bartered with peddlers for secrets overheard in distant towns. Even the priest unknowingly contributed. He mumbled in his sleep during confessions. Eventually, nobles began sending messengers to you. They never called you by name, just the River Watcher. You liked that. You never lied. You didn't have to. People handed you truth freely when they thought no one important was listening. Now, your coin pouch is full. Your hut is guarded. Your hands are soft again, untouched by soap or water. And the river? Still there. Still loud, still hiding the sound of your success behind the splash of secrets, because in the end, dirt washes clean. But knowledge? That stains forever. The worm whisperer, making a killing with rot, decay, and a smile. You knew death like most people know rain, regular, inconvenient, sometimes terrifying, always expected. But you noticed something strange. Every time someone died, the ground was disturbed. The prayers mumbled and the mourners vanished by morning. And within days the grave became active. Not from ghosts, from life, tiny life, worms, insects, things that burrowed and swarmed and multiplied beneath the soil. While others feared what lay under the graveyard, you paid attention. It began with bait. You gathered the fattest worms from the oldest plots, careful to pick them when the earth was still damp with morning mist. Fishermen swore your bait made fish leap from the river like they'd been summoned by a saint. Soon every hook cast from the river bank had one of your worms on it. But you didn't stop there. You found ways to breed them, kept them in dark, damp barrels filled with rotten bread, spoiled cabbage, mouldy straw. The smell was unbearable to others. To you, it was the scent of industry. You sold worm eggs by the pouch, compost starters, flesh-stripping beetles to tanners who needed hides cleaned fast. Even priests came to you for help when plague pits overflowed. You handled their overflow for a fee, of course. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't clean, but it was profitable. And it gave you leverage, because where you worked, secrets were buried, literally. You knew who faked their own death, who buried their wealth with their spouse, who hid notes under corpses hoping they'd never be found. Sometimes you sold those secrets too. Your hands were always dirty, your nails permanently black, but you walked with a quiet confidence, because even the cleanest noble in silk slippers feared what lived in the ground beneath him. You became known as the Worm Whisperer. People said you spoke to the earth. They weren't entirely wrong, because while knights chase dragons and merchants cross seas, You made a fortune digging quietly into the one thing everyone feared, and everyone became death. The festival fixer, betting, bribery, and medieval event management. You never cared for the hard work of sewing or smithing. Your tools were dice, whispers, and winks exchanged behind stalls. And festivals, they were your harvest season. Every saint's day, every seasonal feast, every royal visit, you'd be there before sunrise. Not to pray, not to feast, but to orchestrate. At first you set up games, rigged wooden wheels, cup shuffles where the ball never sat still, archery contests with bent arrows sold to poor fools trying to win a goose. It wasn't theft, it was entertainment, and no one could prove a thing. But your genius wasn't in scamming, it was in seeing the flow of the day. You noticed who drank early, who bet heavy, which performer drew the biggest crowd, and which constable accepted a bribe to look away. Soon you weren't just setting up games, you were running the show. You arranged singing contests between drunk farmers, wagered on pie-eating matches between men who hadn't eaten since the solstice. You controlled the prize money, took a cut of every bet, and more than once paid the loser extra to throw the match at just the right time. You greased palms to ensure your stalls had the best placement. You hired kids to shout fake praise for your roasted chestnuts and miracle dice. Even brawls became part of the act. You once staged a spontaneous wrestling match between two visiting guards. They both worked for you. The crowd tossed coins like petals. By dusk, you'd be counting earnings while others nursed hangovers or pickled pig's feet. People started calling you the festival fixer. By then you had a rotating team of jugglers, fire breathers, dancers, and swindlers. Each knew their role. Each owed you a favor, or a debt. You weren't just making money, you were creating moments. Moments where peasants forgot they were poor and lords forgot they were hated. And that kind of distraction, that was worth every coin. The illicit ink seller, how copying forbidden books built a hidden fortune. They said knowledge was power. You discovered it was profit too. You started humbly sweeping the floor of a monastery scriptorium. No one looked twice at you. Just another servant, breathing too loudly, walking too quietly. But you watched. You watched monks with trembling fingers copy Latin texts by candlelight. Watched how they mixed soot and wine to make ink. Watched how they held their breath when transcribing banned pages, works deemed heretical, dangerous, or simply too expensive for the common soul. And one night, after sweeping under a shelf, you stole a single page. It meant nothing to you at the time, just dense letters and odd diagrams. But when you showed it to a travelling merchant the next day, he offered you 3 loaves of bread and a wax-sealed letter with instructions. Copy more. So you did. By night, you traced pages in secret, used crushed berries and soot for ink, flattened pigskin for makeshift parchment. You didn't understand half the words, but they did. Alchemists, apothecaries, rebels. They craved texts not found in cathedrals, cures for diseases, diagrams of machines, maps to hidden places. You weren't just selling parchment. You were trafficking forbidden knowledge. Your copies improved. You found a blind man to dictate letters while you traced, a runaway monk to verify the Latin, and a travelling student who smuggled books across borders, sewn into coats and saddlebags. You became known, quietly, in whispers and winks. They called you the Inkmonger. You moved like smoke between towns, selling scrolls to those who could afford them and ideas to those who couldn't. It was dangerous. You heard stories of people burned for lesser things, so you made decoys. You stashed your true works in hollow tree trunks, behind crumbling well stones under false floors. Once a bishop's guard raided your hut, found nothing but dried herbs and innocent prayers. He left, confused. You didn't sleep for 3 nights, but the next week, that same guard came back, alone, and asked if you had anything on healing blood cough. You did. He paid in silver. By the time your hair greyed, your fingers were permanently stained black. But you didn't care. You were wealthy, not with coin, though there was plenty of that, but with secrets. Secrets copied 1 line at a time, sold 1 scroll at a time, in ink dark as midnight and twice as dangerous. Because in a world where knowledge could kill, you became the most valuable person of all, the one who dared to write it down. The pig dealer's scam, how selling the same animal twice made 1 peasant rich. You never liked pigs. The grunting, the smell, the way they looked at you like they knew something you didn't. But pigs, they were currency. In your village, a well-fed hog could be worth a season's grain. So when your uncle died and left you with nothing but a half-rotted pen and 2 mangy sows, you didn't mourn. You schemed. You cleaned the pigs, brushed the caked mud from their sides, patched the pen, fattened them on stolen turnips and leftover barley mash. Then you brought one to market. You gave him a name, Saint Hamrick. Told anyone who'd listen he'd survived a wolf attack, protected a child from bandits, and even sniffed out truffles once. He was a miracle pig. You sold him for 5 times his worth. The buyer was thrilled, and the next week you sold him again. How? Simple. You had a cousin 2 villages away. The pig went there, got a new name, Brother Grunt. Same pig, new story. Sold again. You did this for years. You became a travelling pig dealer. Bought 1 or 2 pigs a season, sold them a dozen times. You dyed spots on them with mashed berries and soot. You tied ribbons around their ears. Sometimes you added a wooden leg to fake an old injury. You crafted stories so rich they made bards weep. The pigs never complained. They got food, travel, and attention. You made sure each new buyer thought they were getting something rare. You even created a false ledger of pig ancestry, tracing your prized boars back to Roman war pigs. No one questioned it. No one could read Latin anyway. Eventually the scam grew. You taught others. Trusted ones. Formed a circle. Each of you ran pigs in a circuit. The same animals rotating endlessly through villages like wandering saints with curly tails. By the time anyone got suspicious, the pig was already in another province with a new alias and a fatter belly. You were never caught, because when a pig finally died, the buyer blamed bad luck, not fraud. And when he tried to resell it, well, it was dead, and you were long gone. You retired with land, a title, and enough pork anecdotes to fill a library. No one ever connected the dots. Just a humble pig merchant, they said. Smart with animals, blessed by fortune. And you sat by the fire, smiling, knowing you'd made a fortune off the same 3 pigs, over and over again. So, now you know. Behind the cathedrals, past the castles, and far from the poetry of kings and knights, there were people like you, people with cracked fingernails and clever minds, who didn't dream of thrones, they just wanted to survive the week, maybe make a little extra doing it. They weren't saints, they weren't always honest, but they were brilliant, quietly, dangerously brilliant. And as you sit there now, still, maybe a little sleepy, maybe not, just think about it. Would you have made it? Would you have seen the angles, the cracks in the system? Would you have had the nerve to sell 1 pig 12 times, or copy forbidden text by moonlight with a monk's heartbeat in your ears? Or would you have stayed in the dirt, afraid to look sideways? That's the thing about history. We hear the names of kings, but it was hustlers who kept the wheels turning. And maybe, just maybe, they were the real geniuses all along. If you made it this far into the video, thank you, truly. Let me know in the comments which hustle you would have tried, or which one you think you'd fall for. It's more telling than you think. And if this kind of strange, dark, quiet history helps you breathe a little slower at night, go ahead and subscribe, just if it brings you peace. Until next time, sleep well, scheme carefully, and remember, some of the richest people in history never held a coin. They just knew how to play. Good night.